we tell students, go talk to the favorite professor. Tell them, here's where I sat. I came to office hours. Here's what I asked about. Would you be willing to be a reference? And overwhelmingly, they want to help.
One of our classmates who's been on the podcast, Mike Keenan, recently reminded me that we went out to lunch with Professor Nelson, who was our civil procedure professor. I had no memory of this, which is shocking because he was my favorite professor. And he's like, yes, you made me go to lunch with you and Professor Nelson, and we ate like burritos. But now I'm thinking if I needed him to be a reference for anything, would I be like, I haven't taken the exam yet, but I was the one that we had a burrito.
Had burritos,
This is Admissible. I'm Natalie Blazer, Dean of Admissions at UVA Law. I am beyond excited for today's episode because I get to welcome not one, but two of my law school classmates into the studio. They, like me, returned to Charlottesville and UVA Law to work in the administration and give back to this wonderful community. My guests today are Assistant Dean for Private Practice, Lauren Parker, and Director of Private Practice, Kira Walmer, both 2008 graduates of UVA Law. Prior to joining the Office of Career Services, Dean Parker was a senior associate in the Washington, D.C. office of Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe. She received a BA in English and a JD from the University of Virginia. As an undergraduate, Parker was a Jefferson Scholar and a counselor for the University Judiciary Committee. During her time at the law school, she participated in Moot Court, the North Ground Softball League, and the Raven Society. Director Walmer worked as an associate at Dixteen Shapiro, where she focused on government contracts litigation. She then moved into the field of education, joining the founding team of a public charter school committed to educational equity and college access for all students. Director Walmer received a BA from Penn State University. During her time at UVA Law, she was involved with the Libel Show, the Public Interest Law Association, and was a peer advisor. Welcome to the show, Dean Parker and Director Walmer, but since we are friends, I'm going to refer to you both as Lauren and Kira, if that's okay.
And we shall call you Natalie.
Sounds good. I'm so happy you guys are here.
Thank you for having us. We're delighted.
Yeah, we are quite thrilled to be joining you here.
Very excited for this conversation. So we all met over 20 years ago.
Do you have to tell them how old we are?
I mean, it feels like a blink of an eye, but we were 1Ls in 2005. I'm curious for each of you, what stands out as like a memory from law school or your favorite part, like when you think back on those days?
Well, I, as you mentioned, was involved in and loved Libel Show. And so those are certainly some joyful memories that jump out for me. And things have really come full circle recently. We had some alums back doing recruiting on behalf of their law firms and had the chance to speak with a fellow cast member. And those things come back to life in an instant. You're back backstage. And so I feel like that's been something that's been really joyful in this role, is sort of like having those memories revived and enjoying that. And I think that's something that's unique to UVA Law. And it's wonderful to see how fast it all comes back to you.
You're giving me an idea, which is alumni cast of Libel Show.
Maybe I was planting that seed all along.
Now, this didn't make my bio, but I was, like a flash in the pan, briefly in the Libel Show. I had maybe one memorable number in our first year, but I lacked Kira's talent, and so I was not invited back. It's been a lot of fun to watch them as an administrator, though. I don't think I appreciated what the students think of faculty and administrators. When I was a student, it's different to see it from this side.
It's really fun to see from this side because for me, in admissions, I knew a certain side of them when I admitted them. And then suddenly they're singing, they're dancing, they're making jokes. And
I'm always so impressed to see the range of talent. I think you guys really want to be lawyers. You're capable of this. Yeah. And you want to be a lawyer.
It is hilarious to have just done interview prep with someone, right? Yeah, and had these very focused answers, and then they're dancing
and making
and they're
fun
great
of us
at it.
in
Yes,
song.
that too.
I think it's all just good, to keep in mind how well-rounded our students are and how that can help them even going forward in a career, which we are going to talk about today. Lauren, anything that stands out for you? Do you want to talk about?
Other than my brief moment of glory in the Libel Show, I had a lot of fun with the North Ground Softball League. Yep. I guess that's maybe a UVA Law stereotype. I was as unathletic as it gets. I have no hand-eye coordination, but everybody is welcome. It was a lot of fun. We had a great section team. And watching that today, again, from the other side is so much fun. We have students come in for counseling in their wonderful law firm-sponsored jerseys. It remains alive and well at the school.
Yeah.
It's great.
Definitely great. Okay, so we have a lot to cover today, but I want to start, before we dive into what the legal job market is like out there, what you all in career services are doing to help our students. I just want to give folks a little bit more background, how you all got to law school and maybe what brought you back. I mentioned in your bios, Lauren, you went to UVA, Kira, you went to Penn State. Do you remember, I mean, again, this was a long time ago now for all of us, but do you remember like how you knew you wanted to go to law school? What planted that seed? Anything about your application process? What can you share about that?
Yes, I do have a pretty clear memory of it. I took some courses in college with this beloved professor who was also a booster for UVA Law. So not only was it planting the seed of, I like this way of thinking, I like this kind of writing, we were reading cases and briefing, but I also got the sense that this was a place that you wanted to go if you possibly could. So I was pretty laser focused on UVA from the beginning, which was great motivation for all of the writing and the standardized test taking that you have to prepare for. But that was an early goal of mine.
Yeah, awesome.
And I'm one of those very unsurprising that she chose law, paths to law. I was as liberal arts as it gets as a kid. I loved reading and writing. Joined mock trial in high school. When I was at UVA, I did the Judiciary Committee. I sort of knew all along I wanted to be an advocate. And my father was a very different type of lawyer. He was a criminal defense attorney in Baltimore. And that's what I thought the practice of law was until I got to UVA and learned a lot of big law firm names. But I knew it's what I wanted to do. And my law school list was very short. As a UVA undergrad, I knew this was the best place to be on earth, and I didn't really want to go anywhere else. So I don't even remember how many I applied to, but UVA was one and done for me.
And you came straight through like me. I think, Kira, you took a year or two off?
Yes. Yeah, I took 2 years off.
Okay.
I worked as a legal assistant in D.C. So the whole get a practical taste of it and make sure that you like what you might do. And I did. And I should also give a plug to Admitted Students Weekend. Having attended those events at a couple of schools, again, UVA's was very memorable. There was just a fervency of the students when they were asking, where are you thinking about going? The cases they made for UVA Law were so strong. They were really like harnessing the advocacy skills on behalf of law school admissions. And I can remember the conversations. And they were just very focused on naming. These are all the reasons why this is the obvious choice.
I love that. And then I mentioned in your bios what you were doing in your legal careers before coming back to career services. But was there a moment in time, like how did you decide to come back into this role in career counseling in the law school administration? Like how did that all come together?
I think we're going to talk about this a little bit, but what we do now didn't really exist and certainly didn't exist in its current form when we were all students. So I didn't really know this was a job. But I was practicing in D.C. I was doing antitrust litigation with the D.C. office of a firm headquartered out of San Francisco. I really enjoyed it, but my husband and I were sort of ready for a change. We had extremely fond memories of Charlottesville, and I thought, I wonder if I could make a living in Charlottesville. And originally we were both going to stay with our firms and work remotely, which then, pre-COVID, many years pre-COVID, was more novel than it is today. But I applied for a couple jobs at the law school, and this one hit. And I will say it's the best job I never knew existed. So I was absolutely delighted it worked out this way. And that was 10 years ago. I've been here ever since.
10 years already, my gosh.
We're so old.
That's the theme. Well, I certainly have to credit Lauren because she planted a seed last reunion. We were speaking. We were in Withers Brown talking to each other.
And I'm always recruiting.
Yeah, off the clock, but working hard. And we were speaking about the work I'd been doing most recently in K-12 education. And so it was a mix of teaching, doing instructional coaching for teachers, doing some recruiting, sort of all these pieces that when you braid them together looked a lot like what she was doing. And at that time I was living in Colorado and wasn't looking to make a move, but I got some outreach when a role opened up in the office and I thought, this is exactly what she spoke about. It feels like such a strong match. And applied, heard back quite quickly, which was lovely. It feels like a risk when you're applying to this institution that you love so much and you have these incredible memories. So that was really exciting. And then through the interview process, it just became so obvious that it was going to be something I would love. And I have loved it. Loved it for less time than Lauren. I've been here for a year and change, but really, really enjoying it.
So I'm curious, now that we're talking about your returns to the law school, were either of you, and at very different times, like 10 years ago for Lauren, a little over a year ago for Kira, and I'm kind of right in the middle, like 5 years ago, were you worried that it was going to be like, I'm back at the law school and I'm in Charlottesville, but I'm not in law school, which was pretty great. So am I going to be disappointed? I'm curious what you thought about that.
First couple years were odd because that many years ago, I felt a lot closer to the student experience. I felt like, I just left and these are my people, these 1Ls and 2Ls and 3Ls. Now that in keeping with the aging theme, that all feels distant enough. But yeah, when I first got back, I thought, what's it going to be like to be in Charlottesville and not be a student, which since I was an undergrad as well is not a thing that's ever happened. But yeah, life at the law school was fabulous. It turns out it's a great place to be. Great place to be an adult as well. And the administrative community is fabulous. And all my law school friends are back.
Yeah, we keep coming back. 2008, less
different than it even was when I started.
Yeah, I felt in a sense like I'd stayed really connected because I sort of have had this running conversation with a group of good friends from law school over now it's been 18 years. We sort of like kept that dialogue alive via email, text chain. And so I felt close to the experience in ways, but certainly had those moments of thinking, okay, is it my law school still? And I totally agree. I feel that it's still very much mine, and I have all the pride and connection. And certainly, do I try to live vicariously through the students a bit by asking about their libel show participation? Maybe, but that's building rapport. So that's part of the job. I mean, that's why I'm doing it.
I used to write for the Law Weekly. Now we read about ourselves in it. Same.
Well, I brought you guys here today to talk about something that I get questions about all the time, which is what is going on essentially in the legal job market, because a lot has changed. And I think we're going to cover what it looks like today. But I think especially from the time that we were going through the process of trying to get jobs when we were young little law students. Can you give a brief overview to just give context to listeners? Like, what was it like back then when we wanted to find our jobs? We were in law school, but we knew we had to get a job. So how did that work?
It was a very, very different process than it is today, and even than it was when I started this job almost 10 years ago now. I don't think I worked at all with a career counselor in any capacity. And I don't believe I met many lawyers before the week of on-grounds interviewing, which is where I met my sort of 1L summer employer, which was not a firm, and then my 2L summer employer, which was. So I ended up making a decision that, I stayed with the firm 8 years, making that decision based on a very small number of interactions and not a ton of research. So it was we'll talk about what it's like now, but that's not at all
very
the current
different.
Experience.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that accords with my experience. A very compressed timeline, sort of like limited opportunity to get to know firms and attorneys, and what was a pretty quick decision.
Yes, agreed. Listeners have heard me say this before, but I did not speak to a career counselor or frankly even know that was an office in the law school. It could have been, I'm sure it was, I'm sure they were great, but that was not my experience. I found my 1L summer job completely on my own, applied for it on my own. And then at some point, somebody, not even an administrator, like a fellow classmate said, are you going to interview with firms? You just go on the website and do XYZ. And then I showed up and put on a suit, bought my very first suit from Banana Republic. I still have it. And we lined up for like a week. And you're right, talked to the employers. And that was kind of that.
We ad-libbed, and if a student attempted today what worked for us back then, I would be horrified.
So what did you each do for your 1L summer? I'm just curious.
I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. in the Felony Trial Division.
Cool.
So, got to do just a lot that was like hands-on involved, research, writing, and watching a lot of excellent advocacy.
And then was your 2L summer Dickstein?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I spent my summer associate at the firm that I ultimately joined.
Got it.
I don't think I knew you were at the U.S. Attorney's Office first summer. I was as well, but I was in the Civil Division in D.C. So,
Oh my God, funny.
yeah, it was fabulous. And I thought at the time my goal was to join the U.S. Attorney's Office permanently or maybe Department of Justice. And then I met my firm in my sort of 2L summer process, or Carrington and Sutcliffe, and joined them after graduation and never left till I came here.
Yeah. So we had similar experiences with the 2L. We all did something in the public sector 1L summer, and then our 2L summers kind of ultimately turned into our post-graduation firm jobs. Suffice it to say, the two of you just landing these like very prestigious U.S. Attorney's Office jobs your 1L summer with like zero guidance is just, wild.
Well, I say they certainly were prestigious. I remember actually, I do have a strange isolated memory of running into, quite literally, a U.S. attorney interviewer in the hallway. And we struck up a conversation, and he was like, "Would you like a job?" And I remember saying, it was just that lucky and informal.
Wow.
Don't think it's quite that way now, but those were the days.
Well, now that everybody knows what a simpler time that was, I want to talk about over the last 20 years or so, how did it evolve into what it is now? So career services, as far as we knew, like, we didn't know anything about it. We didn't interact with it. So I don't know. You guys tell me what makes more sense to talk about how the market has changed, or maybe start with how our model has changed, and we can kind of go from there.
I think there are probably two mile markers that make sense to understand the change. So we all graduated in 2008, which that fact is out of the bag. There's no taking it back. We're that old. In 2009, in the throes of sort of the economic crisis, the law school brought in Kevin Donovan, who had been a law firm partner for about 20 years, to head what was then, I think it was called Career Services at that time. And he brought with him sort of the revolutionary procedure and approach that we apply today. It was his idea to apply the same client service orientation to career counseling at a state university school that he had applied as a law firm partner for, Fortune 100 clients. And the client service model was applied both to law firms trying to recruit at UVA and to the students themselves. And that was a huge innovation. It revolutionized the way the department works. So I would say that was sort of one of the major things that changed, that sort of underpins the way we approach the job today. For a few years after Kevin was here, and none of us were here in 09, 10, 11, et cetera, I know that they had a lot to do with that economic time. But for several years, and when I joined in 2016, the National Association of Legal Recruiters, something like that. It's NALP.
I think it's National Association of Legal Professionals, maybe.
Something like that makes sense. It ends with a P.
Yeah.
NALP, as we call it. Our trade industry association, comprised of recruiters from law firms, career counselors from law schools, had some guidelines in place that sort of governed the timing of interactions, both with your career office as a student and also with private sector legal employers, law firms. And so those rules and procedures sort of set a pace for when work was done. In 2018, December of 2018, which was a couple years after I got here, the NALP guidelines were dissolved, I believe at the advice of antitrust counsel. And so the rules that had sort of, again, governed when students could work with counselors, when they could apply for jobs, how long the offers should be held, all those sorts of things went away. And that was sort of a very pivotal shift that I think explains a lot of what we're seeing today.
And so just to put that in concrete terms for listeners, when we were in law school, legal recruiters per NALP rules were not allowed to contact us before a set date.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yes, pretty much. And NALP will tell you, and they did say, these weren't rules so much as guidelines, but everybody followed them.
Right.
And so, student couldn't meet with a career counselor before October 1. A firm wasn't supposed to solicit applications before November 1. Students weren't supposed to apply. Offers were supposed to be held for 28 days. All these sorts of things that up until a few years ago were very routine and unquestioned. And then they went away.
Right. And when you say offers should be held, that means if the firm makes you an offer, you have 28 days to tell them yes or no.
Yes, that's a good clarification. When a firm made an offer of summer employment to a student, the firm was, under the NALP guidelines, supposed to give the student 28 days to consider that offer before they had to accept or decline.
So that is now very different, in terms of the timing of the process. We discussed how it was when we were here. As Kira mentioned, very compressed timeline. We didn't even think about, or at least I didn't even think about, applying for my 2L summer job until I was about to start 2L year. And even that felt early at the time because all I had was 1L year under my belt, 1L grades. So now everything is getting sort of earlier and earlier. And so it sounds like with the NALP rules going away, the NALP guidelines going away, firms are it's a total free market. They're going to reach out whenever they want to reach out. They're going to give you a much shorter timeline to get back to them, right?
Yes, so absolutely. What we have now in the absence of the guidelines is good old-fashioned free market competition, which means that the competitors, the law firms competing for legal talent, have to get creative. They have to innovate. They have to, sort of come up with new ways, and as it turns out, earlier ways to identify and recruit talent being student candidates for jobs, to draw them in, to build relationships, to entice them to take the jobs. And they've done that, both sort of by interacting with schools earlier and earlier, coming to meet students, in our case, on grounds, hosting events there, et cetera, sort of a lot of what we call networking that none of us had to do. And they're doing it in sort of, innovations in offer timelines and some of that stuff, too. That 28-day thing is no more.
Right. Well, just zooming out big picture, I mean, this all sounds great in the sense of it's a very healthy market. There are jobs out there, right? Like the firms are the ones falling all over themselves to hire the law students, right? It's not the law students clawing their way for these limited jobs, at least at UVA.
At least, certainly at UVA. Maybe it's the fact that I was an antitrust litigator in my prior life, but I fully believe what the American antitrust laws sort of posit, which is that free market competition is good for consumers, and the students are the consumers. Champagne problems are still problems, but this is absolutely, as you say, what we are experiencing now is the result of a lot of fabulous legal employers fighting to hire our students.
Yeah.
And so it does feel intense. That does create, a big workload and some anxiety. But gosh, it's really nice to have them falling all over themselves give you a very large starting salary to do incredible legal work.
And by the way, with like no grades or like
not very many
or maybe one semester. So let's talk about this. So now suddenly you're, a 1L starts, okay? They're trying to understand crim law and contracts and civil procedure and torts. They're also pretty much right away having to think about how they're going to find a job, right? So there's a balance there that they, that again, just to reiterate for the 10th time, that we did not have to do. We had the luxury of figuring out law school and learning the law and like dedicating ourselves to class and study and exams and of course all the social activities that we've discussed and softball, like the important things. But jobs, that was a future problem for us to solve. So obviously today we're really focused on the private sector side. I know that public service has always had a unique timeline, but obviously today we're just talking about, folks who want to go into private sector. For the most part, that means law firms. So let's hear about like how it starts. So let's say I'm a 1L, I get here. How and when do I have to go find a career counselor? Like, how do I know who to reach out to? When do I do it? Can you just walk us through that process?
Sure. So we know those are urgent questions for students, right? I think as soon as we start having the opportunity to meet with the incoming class, those questions are coming fast and furious. And we appreciate that. They're aware of what's happening and they're really hungry to find out, how can I get started? And of course, our answer is start with orientation, get a sense of life in Charlottesville, settle in, but pretty quickly we will be ready to work with you. So students meet with us in a kickoff and embedded in their orientation, and then pretty quickly have the opportunity to get their resume, their sort of foundational document ready, and then to set up counseling with an assigned counselor within our office. So they have the opportunity early on to choose which office they'd like to meet with first, judicial clerkships, public service, or office of private practice, and then accordingly, we are up and running and ready to counsel quite quickly.
If I'm a 1L and I see you all at the kickoff along with your fellow counselors, I'm like, well, how am I supposed to choose? Or you're going to choose, you're just assigned randomly. If you're in the office of private practice, I mean.
You're not, actually. So we meet you at orientation, as Kira said, and we give you sort of a big overview of here's what's coming down the pike. We know there's a lot, a lot swirling. You're very eager. Don't worry, we have a process. First thing in the process is quite literally a survey. Every student who wants counseling from any of the offices fills it out, what they think their goals are, target market, practice area leanings if they have them. Do I want to, sort of start with a clerkship conversation, or would I rather talk about firms? And then they are assigned to an initial counselor based on those interests.
I see.
A student who is really interested in Pennsylvania is probably going to Kira if they want to work at a law firm. Somebody who wants antitrust is probably coming to me. So one of the nice things about our office being full of people who practiced, and not only on the private sector side, but all the way up and down career development, is that there is someone with experience, probably personal experience, in a lot of the careers that our students are looking for. So you're assigned based on your interest to an initial counselor, and you meet with that person much of the first semester, the fall semester. We do pretty quickly open everybody up to meet with anybody they'd like, both for scheduling purposes and for their preferences. So shortly into the semester, someone who is tired of working with me can go and work with somebody else.
I doubt that has ever happened.
Unprecedented.
Unprecedented. So I'm sure it varies from student to student based on based on a lot of factors. How often are these counseling appointments? Are you setting a schedule far out in advance, or is this on an as-needed basis? How does that work?
Yes, students are really empowered to sort of pace those, but we give guidelines. So we'll name, here's the framework for our appointments, here's what we'll accomplish on our initial, second, third appointment. But absolutely, we want students to drive. I think that's a big theme of ours in general. So they're thinking about how quickly can I turn around this cover letter and get these revisions ready? When am I ready to, set my first interview practice, for example? Certainly, we have guidance, and we are sort of trying to communicate with students throughout the semester and their time here what they need to know at the moment that is useful to them, because we know how much they're trying to balance and navigate.
You're trying not to unload everything on them at once.
Yes.
So I'm glad you kind of started bringing those things up, because I want to talk about, so it sounds like they can pace it out, but you're making sure they're meeting with you often enough to get what they need to get done. So what do they need to get done? What's happening in each of those appointments?
It's a good question. So up until this last year, it was pretty straightforward. Come in and have an initial conversation. Usually in that conversation, we're going to go through your resume, your foundational application document. It's the equivalent of the old-fashioned business card. It's the first thing you're going to be handing out when you're handing anything out in the recruiting process. Second meeting, usually we're working into a cover letter. That's sort of the second most common application document for a private sector legal application for a first summer or a second summer job. Third meeting, usually we're getting into narrative, which is sort of our office's first step in interview preparation. What's your story? What are your interests? How are we sort of stringing together the essential facts of you when we talk to an employer? And then fourth appointment, a mock interview. I say sort of up until last year, because usually pacing those out over the course of the fall semester, that might be all somebody needed who was thinking about maybe applying to one of those scarce 1L law firm jobs in D.C. or New York or Chicago, and that was that. Now that we have sort of a more accelerated 2L process, we are seeing, we are sort of having a lot of the class have all of those appointments and maybe additional appointments for strategy and for help interpreting employer correspondence or responding to it, sort of lots of other things that might come up. We are seeing people who are not interested in a 1L firm job at all still meeting with us.
Sure, because
that many times and more to get ready for the 2L process.
So timing-wise, again, I'm the hypothetical 1L. I'm meeting with you. I have a counselor. I'm assigned to a counselor, and I have my meetings, maybe 4 or more appointments in the fall semester. But when am I actually applying to my 1L summer job and my 2L summer job?
So this is something, right, we can talk about this year in that context. It's difficult to predict forward. What could that look like next year? I think what's most important is that you're tracking and getting a sense and you're building toward whatever the date is. And the date may move by next season. But if you're thinking ahead to when firms have started to share that they plan to open applications, you're thinking a lot about, do I have a sense of firms that are of high interest, firms that I've had a chance to connect with, ideally, so that I've really gotten to know them? And do I have the documents in place so that I can apply? And no matter when the date moves, and certainly this year, that date has moved into this semester in terms of portals opening. There's a healthy number open as we speak.
And that's for 1L summer jobs and 2L summer jobs?
That is both, yes, sometimes concurrently.
And so it's a really fluid target, which is why having this conversation today is very different. If we had had this conversation November of last year, I would have said, oh, gosh, unless you want to apply to a 1L Texas office law firm job, you probably just need your stuff before the end of exams. You want to, sort of be making applications December, maybe early January. Get a 1L firm job if that's what you're trying for, maybe a 1L public service job or a judicial internship is what you end up doing. Then we're thinking about the 2L process in the spring. This year, unfolding in real time, we've had a lot of firms say, gosh, maybe we still have a handful of 1L jobs. And those were always scarce, by the way. The law firm recruiting model outside of Texas markets has always been predominantly 2L summer focused. So whereas we'd have a bunch of people in prior years sort of try for a 1L DC big law job, they usually had a plan B. Firms in this new and innovative cycle have sort of said, gosh, like maybe we do have 1L jobs and we'll open those up in the fall. But increasingly, we know the important summer is the second summer. We're going to open those up as well. And so one thing we do in our office is we sort of troll every day what law firm portals are open. Are they open for 1L jobs, 2L jobs, both? In the realm of firm innovation, some firms are saying, okay, our application is for 2L summer, and as a part of that job, you might have an option to spend some of your 1L summer with us as well. So they've sort of just leapfrogged right to the main show. Yep. So people are, in fact, applying today in November of their fall, 1L fall.
When, I was thinking back as a 1L, I barely even was getting my feet wet in understanding what law school was. So that is wild to comprehend. But I just want to flag 2 things. The first being, yes, by the time even this comes out, I don't know, things could change. But I don't, probably not. But this is a fluid situation. Again, free market. They can do whatever they want. So we're talking, today, mid-November. This episode will release December 5th. But I think the point is, your office is constantly sort of monitoring. You're on top of it. You know when these things are happening, so that even if next year, when somebody is starting as a 1L, you're going to be the ones telling them this is what you need to be doing and this is the timeline. So I think the exact dates aren't as important, except for as a contrast of it just keeps coming earlier and earlier. And so the second thing I wanted to bring up is, okay, so I'm a 1L. November 1st, I have the opportunity to apply for 1L summer and or 2L summer. And just, again, to reiterate that 2L summer, for a lot of people, is what is going to translate into a post-graduation offer. It happened for all 3 of us. I think that's very common. So if I'm a 1L, how do I even know what firm I might be interested in for the first part of my career? In terms of location, practice group, personality, how are they learning about that?
We've sort of not put a fine point on what is a huge piece of the law firm job search today that, again, we all didn't do. The networking piece. I will say, as accelerated as the timetable feels today, the average UVA Law Fall 1L knows more about law firms than I did when I applied for a job in August of my, sort of rising 2L year. They have met firms. They have talked to practitioners. They have listened to panel after panel. So they have, I can only imagine it still feels like not nearly enough information to make such a big decision. But historically speaking, they are better educated than any class before them.
And that's because firms are coming here to Charlottesville. They're putting on events. They're chatting with. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so, I remember once I got 2L summer offers, then you would go to like Boar's Head and have a cocktail reception and be like, do I like this? But like before I applied, zero research, zero knowledge, except for really geographical preference. And so how do you counsel? I want to talk about like the overall strategy, but for this networking piece, because they're busy law students, they have studying, they have extracurriculars. How do you counsel them? Because I can imagine, there would be a different event every day.
Oh, not just one.
Like multiple.
Dozens of
events
a week.
riches.
Well, and we in the docket, the daily docket, which is like a news, I don't know what would you even call it? Like a daily, just like what's on the docket, what's happening at the law school. Yeah, I skim through that, and it's like Lone Star Lawyers, this firm's coming, that firm's coming. So what do you advise, especially 1Ls, about how to manage and navigate and pick and choose what to go to and what to skip maybe?
We have a session for that. Truly, though, in our Intro to Employer Interaction session, which we use to sort of launch that process and help students think through it, one thing we talk about is networking with intentionality. So, you're thinking ahead about sort of what are my key markets, where do I have connections, where do I see myself practicing, how can I use the research tools efficiently to figure out which firms are doing which work that might match me. Reflecting on, am I someone who likes a big reception? Maybe there's sort of a multi-firm event being put on by a student organization. I think I thrive in that setting. Am I someone who thinks I will absolutely shine in a one-on-one coffee chat? I'll feel comfortable. I'll make a deep connection. I can, have someone that I can correspond with going forward. So really like knowing yourself and knowing which events are going to be efficient and are going to play to your strengths is pretty important, and choosing each one with intention, not sort of getting swept up in the fever of all the events.
Absolutely. Play to your strengths, as Kira said so well. Think about the format of event, and more is not more. We sort of preach network smarter, not harder. If you're looking at, I would say look out the next week, the next 2 weeks on the docket, see what's coming. If it's not relevant to your personal goals, cross it off.
Yep.
If I'm not trying to be in Texas, I'm not going to the Lone Star Lawyers, conversation with whatever firm. And so I think in that way, we help them try to navigate what can feel like a big crush of knowledge-getting activities for the firm search.
So before I get into sort of the different formats of networking events, because I don't even think I realized there was anything other than like the shake hands, cocktail reception format. But you mentioned, Kira, sessions, like in addition to your one-on-one counseling appointments, you all do like, I'm making this up, but you tell me, like a lunchtime session where anybody can come and learn about employer interactions. What are the other like sessions you offer throughout the year? We already talked about the kickoff at orientation. So that's like their first introduction to you. And then can you what else comes after that?
Yeah, I'll put in a plug for one that I think is really meaningful, which is the Keeper session. So a session that lands as students are heading out to their 1L or 2L summer firm jobs, where we're really able to talk through how to make the impression they want to, what to prioritize, how to be a value add, and sort of navigate not only the etiquette, but the substance of the work in a way that lets them present themselves as the brilliant people we know them to be, to make sure the firm sees that as well. So that's one that I think is something that we're really proud to put on.
And balancing sort of programming with individual counseling it's a challenge, and we're sort of constantly thinking about this as the market changes and the demands on their time change. We are, if we haven't said this clearly yet, very heavy on individual counseling, particularly in this free market competition scenario. individual goals and strategies are the absolute best way through the chaos. Figure out where you're trying to get and try to tune out what everyone else is doing. But there are a few sessions, and we talked about, so we meet them at orientation and we give a bit of a pitch. We have a private sector kickoff, which is sort of a full hour of our office talking into predominantly practice areas. We will talk a little bit about the structure of the year and how to work with us, but then we give an overview of litigation work, regulatory work, and transactional work to help introduce students to, even at the broadest strokes, what type of practice might be available to them at a firm. We do the Intro to Employer Interactions session. We have a spring kickoff, and we have the professionalism session Kira was mentioning. I think that's pretty much it for the year.
I mean, I say this with all seriousness. You referred to it as the keeper session, which is like, I guess, how do you present to the firm that you're a keeper, right? Like, how did we know what to do? We didn't know. How did we know? I walked into that firm with nothing. I mean, again, like, I'm just fascinated that it all seemed to work out because, now look, I had been a paralegal for a summer in college. Like, I guess I had a year of law school under my belt. I had a 1L summer, but like, I didn't know any of this stuff. Nobody told me what litigation was versus corporate versus bankruptcy. Like, it's just kind of, it's just baffling to think how much more educated they are now.
It really, I would say you put your finger on it. It's a hot miracle I kept my job as long as I did. The things I didn't know could fill volumes. I remember the first keeper session, and it was Kevin Donovan's sort of initial brainchild. It was called Becoming a Keeper. It was actually taught over the course of hours. I think it might have been a couple days of sort of solid professionalism training. He did firm economics, like what is the path to partnership? Like also, I remember
really
sitting
cool.
through it and thinking, this would have really helped me.
This would have been really helpful. Everything I'm hearing from you already, I'm like, not that I think everything was fine and worked out fine, but like that would have been really good to know.
It would have helped a lot. So and we've distilled that session now. It's an hour in the spring. Tried to get it down to the fine points, but everything from sort of email etiquette to sort of cultivating interpersonal relationships, how to navigate remote work versus live, which is sort of a big post-COVID theme.
Gosh, yeah, I want to talk about that later for sure.
All these things that sort of you're like, what if we had to give you sort of 60 minutes of what to look out for, to show to best effect over your summer as an associate. That's sort of what that is.
And these events, the networking events where the firms are here, we've sort of mentioned Lone Star Lawyers as an example. So that's a student group that obviously is for students who think they might want to practice in Texas. We also have West Coast Wahoos. We have Southeast. We have Midwest. We have student orgs. Of course, also plenty of student orgs that are not tied to any geographical location, but other interests. What's sort of the breakdown of who's putting on these events and how they come to fruition? So student organizations, obviously, Lone Star Lawyers would say, hey, we're going to invite Texas firms to come talk to students who want to practice in Texas. How do the other firm events come to be?
Our student orgs, I think, are the best in the business, and this is an educated perspective. I've talked to a lot of schools about their relationship with their student leaders. Ours are phenomenal. They play a huge role in connecting students with law firms. So we are at the point where many firms just go directly to their sort of well-known partner organizations. They reach out to Lone Star, maybe they reach out to our Balsa chapter, our Virginia Law Women, just directly and say, hey, we want to do this again. We want to partner with you again. Sometimes firms will come to our office and say, hey, we're looking to connect with students. What's a good way to do it, especially in this sort of accelerated market? Our go-to is to point them to the student orgs.
Okay.
You're not going to have a better experience identifying students who are interested in the intersection of law and business than to go directly to the Virginia Law Business Society.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll partner with our Emerging Companies and Venture Capital group and our Law Information Securities Technology group. But sending them directly to the students whose members have indicated by membership an interest in a practice area or a geography or the experience of being an LGBTQ attorney in the law. So we send the firms directly to the groups to put on a lot of these events. Some events will work through us. We have tried over the years to sort of, again, be as efficient and judicious with student time as we possibly can. So we have a couple marquee events over the course of the year. We have a mix and mingle event in the fall where we bring 40 firms to grounds, and students have sort of small group conversations with those folks. Had a fabulously successful one just this fall. I think those conversations have turned into applications, from students saying, I met my firm at the Mix and Mingle. We have a couple of City Day-based events in the spring based on some key markets, D.C., New York, et cetera. And then if a firm is interested in doing something and it doesn't make sense to partner with a student group, we will sort of set up for them. We'll have them do a hospitality suite type event, which is just sort of drop in, get some food, chat with attorneys informally. Maybe they'll do a panel, although increasingly students get talked at all day long, and so maybe not. And then the coffee chat is sort of another one. Set up one-on-one conversations, coffee chats or office hours for students to interact with attorneys.
It's pretty remarkable that the student orgs play such a large role. I mean, and when you think about it, because getting a job is a really huge deal. And obviously it's, with your all guidance and your one-on-one counseling and stuff, but we trust our student orgs to put on these great events that are going to, help move the needle.
We have the best and most generous 2Ls and 3Ls in the business. 1Ls as well, but the 2s and 3s sort of step into the leadership roles.
Yep.
They put just hours of work into bringing firms to grounds, putting on events. They do everything from the room reservation to the food to the programming. They do a beautiful job. Firms consistently tell us how impressed they are with the student-run organizations.
And I'll give a plug, too. The number of times students walk into my office and say, well, my list mentor said, or my VLW mentor mentioned. So they're also taking the time to invest in the membership. And I think as things accelerate, having another voice and another trusted source is just so incredibly powerful.
Gosh, that makes me so happy. So before we move sort of into the next phase of the conversation, I do want to drill down a little bit more on the individual counseling session. So like we've mentioned this, but like you're working on the resume, the cover letter, mock interviews, things like that. When you're looking at like the law school resume, for example, you're not looking at it that much later than I looked at it. Okay. So what's getting added? What's being taken away? Like, what's the most important thing on there? Because I get asked, like, is it still important to do a journal, for example? Do firms care if they're in extracurriculars? Or is it really going to be a close approximation of what resume I saw when they applied to law school?
First of all, it's a page, so that's essential, right? And so often that means the students coming here, as you well know, are heavily involved in community. They had all these wonderful leadership roles. So now we're thinking really carefully about each entry, each bullet, each line, and saying, what value add does this show? Yep. How could this be transferable to your practice of choice? What are you using this bullet to really emphasize? Yep. Did you do it in the most powerful way while staying concise? We understand that, recruiters are going to be seeing so many of these documents. So how can we make sure yours is clean and beautiful and also really powerful? So each thing you're choosing to include does great work on your behalf.
Law firms are particularly interested in your transferable skill set. So maybe you were, you worked on the Hill as an intern before school. Maybe you were part of your student-run newspaper, whatever it is folks are doing. And so one major thing we do in that one page Kira mentioned is help students sort of translate what they used to do in the prior experience into words that signify skills that lawyers need. And even more so, if a student thinks they want to be some sort of litigator, they like the idea of making arguments, doing research, writing briefs, being in court, we're going to look to trial litigation-facing skills, research, writing, analysis. Folks who come in and think they want to do something that looks more transactional, we're going to look at, maybe do they have any drafting skills, negotiation skills, project management skills. So as important as the experiences they did are the ways in which they're described. And frankly, I think a lot of times we explain to students, no, that thing can matter. The experience you had that you think has nothing to do with law is full of transferable skills for the practice of law.
I'll add to that. Something we do in our kickoff is some myth busting. And one of the myths is that you have to have a certain type of professional experience to land a job at a law firm or to be appealing to an employer. And we never want students to undersell the things they've done that took all these transferable skills to do well, but that they may not recognize immediately as analogous to firm practice. Yes. And we want them to see there's value in it. And we also want to really draw out from them through individual counseling. What exactly were you doing? Were you presenting also? Great. We're adding that. Yep. And that's, I think, part of the beauty of the conversations and sitting across from someone with the document and saying, tell me more, tell me more.
Yeah. I don't know how you do this without individual counseling because
Yeah.
I can't look at your resume and know, sort of what it took to be a barista until you explain to me the tremendous client service acumen that you had to employ.
Yeah. How often, because I know that what you do a lot of in these counseling appointments is strategy and how the student is going to apply and what networking events they're going to go to and things like this. How often does someone come to you with like a goal or a path that they want to pursue and you are maybe thinking another path or type of practice group or type of firm or location or whatever it is fits them differently, and like how much are you sort of just serving them as a client and doing whatever they want to do, and how much are you really saying like, let's think about this other path?
I think of this role a lot the way I thought of being a lawyer. You decide the goal and I help you get there. It's my job to help you, identify risk and to help you sort of have the information you need to make sure your goal is a good one for you. But I can't think of a time a student said, I want to do this. And I said, nah, no, probably not. Probably not for you. We definitely have to do a lot of helping students who may have, maybe they have no lawyers in the family. I had a lawyer in the family. I didn't know anything about private sector legal practice areas. We definitely do a lot to help connect students to resources, things they can read, as well as people they can talk to figure out what different legal practice areas actually are, what they look like. So certainly we'll have people say, I like this, this, and this. And we say, oh, maybe you should be thinking about, this big regulatory bucket of legal practice areas. Here are things you can read. So certainly some, guiding to resources. But gosh, I've had multiple students this semester interested in space law. And I'm not sure I've had, 5 space law attorneys in my time here, and I've got them all. And so you know what? I'm learning about space law, which is, in fact, a private sector legal practice area that sometimes lives in telecommunications. And it's a lot of fun.
How much do their grades matter at this stage?
That's an evolving one, too, Natalie. It's a great question. They have no grades right now, and they are being aggressively recruited and networked and so forth. I will say this, over the course of the, going on 10 years I've been here and in the years sort of since Kevin, implemented the client service model that we have today and started really studying and analyzing data and market movement, we've absolutely seen a shift. I mean, there was a time when folks said, firms said we couldn't possibly hire someone without 2 full semesters of grades, and it has to happen at the end of the summer and so on. Last couple of years, firms were sort of like, well, you get your second semester grades in June. Why don't we go ahead and nail you down as early as June? This year, for the first time, some firms are saying sort of on, as a blanket matter, 1 semester of grades is enough. And so a lot of this recruiting and application and learning stuff that we're talking about, it's all happening before our students have any grades at all. I have yet to hear a firm say grades don't matter. They don't need a transcript at all.
Right.
It can happen, and it has happened historically, that for a particular candidate, a firm might say, gosh, here's an offer. We don't need that transcript. We want you sight unseen. For intellectual property candidates, for example, maybe they have a particular degree or a scientific background the firm's really looking for. So it's not that it can't happen. But generally speaking, firms want some grades, and it seems like they are coalescing around the idea that 1 semester of grades is enough.
It puts almost, I would say, more pressure on the 1Ls getting those great first semester grades, in addition to balancing, as we've talked about, all of the actual, application. Again, good problems to have. And like, it sounds like if you make a really personal, great impression on the firm and you're connecting with them before your grades come out, like maybe that's going a long way and your grades are just kind of confirming that you're the bright light they saw. I'm curious, I'm a little bit bouncing around on what you talk about during counseling appointments because new things just kind of keep occurring to me. So listeners have heard me talk a lot about the admissions interview, what we're looking for, what can sink somebody, what we love. I'm curious, when you do your mock interview practice, is there one thing that you're like consistently working on across the board? Like, is there one thing that people genuinely need to improve on? Or like, I'm curious where folks are doing well, where are they falling short? Like in general, like in generalities.
I think one sort of look for or guiding point would be our colleague Daniel has really leaned into this idea of your narrative and your themes, and the themes being strengths of yours. Those live in your cover letter. They're what you choose to highlight. Those need to live in your interview, and that starts from the moment someone asks, tell me about yourself, and you choose what to include. And done well, that means you're like planting these seeds that perhaps your interviewer follows up on. So I think having a really sharp sense of what you would want that person to know about you walking out of that interview, and knowing that you have sort of these formative experiences, anecdotes, and that you'll tell them well, you'll weave them in, and sort of taking that kind of ownership over the interview versus thinking of it as, I wonder what questions they'll ask me, right?
Yeah.
It's impossible to prep for every question, but you can know your story really well and you can tell it really well. And I think that's the heart of what we focus on.
That's a great point. Where I find myself frequently telling students in interview prep, you can't count on the interviewer to ask you good questions or to ask you any particular question. So you are looking at every question as an opportunity to put forth your themes, your takeaways, your selling points, and not in a sort of ram it down their throats kind of way.
Right.
But sort of being ready to give the content that moves, sort of moves the needle, advances the goal to getting hired. We get a lot of people who have done various kinds of interviewing before they come to us. They obviously did admissions interviews. Many of them, we get folks who did interviews in a consulting context or for other things. And so folks come in, I think, with varying degrees of comfort about the process. I do think another unifying theme is no matter what types of interviewing you may have done before, this is a little different. And it's not necessarily harder. It's just sort of adjusting your mindset from whatever interviewing context you're most familiar with to what does an entry-level legal employer need to hear from me? A lot of it is the transferable skill set stuff. Sort of doesn't matter as much, the subject matter of the prior job, but what skills did you use that lawyers use? So identifying themes, stringing together a narrative, and then we do a lot of practice. And I said, I think earlier, we have one mock interview session. In a perfect world, we have a lot.
Right,
People can come back over and over to practice.
So how important now is it to know exactly what you want to do? Because in our day, I accepted my summer offer from Weil Gottschall in New York without really knowing what I was going to do. And then the summer, I'm curious if this still works this way, I rotated through litigation, corporate, and bankruptcy over the course of the summer. I didn't need to tell them anything that I was interested in because they were going to give me the opportunity. And those are three very broad buckets, even in themselves, right? I didn't say antitrust. I didn't say environmental regulation. I said like three of the most broad buckets. So how important now for the interview or for the cover letter or for this whole process, because this actually helps me on the front end, because people are on a spectrum of having some sense of what they want to do.
Yeah, I think the way we describe it is the most important thing is that you appear to the interviewer, to the law firm, to be being thoughtful about what you like, what you're good at, and how that matches what they do. So you don't have to know for sure that you want to be. And I should throw out, by the way, I was an antitrust lawyer by accident. I went into the firm thinking I was doing something very different. The collapse happened. Someone came into my office and was like, hey, Lauren, would you like to be an antitrust lawyer? And I was like, that sounds great. What is that? You needn't be specific. And it is the more exceptional student who has a reason to say something like national security law or intellectual property law or something else. Usually a student needs some sort of demonstrated interest and background to be that specific. Instead, what we're going for, and it starts with the cover letter where you're writing, Dear Employer, I'm interested in your firm because of X reason, is just sort of a thoughtful assessment of the things I think I want to do as a lawyer. I want to research, I want to write, I want to make oral arguments, how that dovetails with practices they have. And then I think most firms absolutely still have either a rotational program or a free market assignment process. So they're looking to see that you've done some work to figure out what they do, and that office makes sense for you from a practice perspective. But I think it's not the sort of pigeon-shaped hole phenomenon that a lot of people fear.
And I think it starts with networking as well. We never want it to be a barrier to entry that someone thinks, I shouldn't go to this event because someone might ask me, what do you want to do? And I'm not sure. But the event itself can be a way you solidify what you want to do, right? If you are listening and you're engaged and you're hearing over and over at these different tables, these aspects of practice that resonate for you. So being able then in a later conversation to say, well, I sat in on this panel. I heard this. It matches really well with what I loved about my major and my thesis. Now I'm going to pursue X next. That's a way that a student who's actually not sure can sound very, very deliberate.
And when they get to the point where they have done the information gathering, they have been through a number of counseling appointments with your team, they're now ready to apply to the jobs. How does that look? They have their resume, they have their cover letter. How does just the actual application process look?
Very good questions. And again, it has changed a little bit. When we did it, it was OGI. You bid, you put your materials into the system. As recently as last year, we were still doing that. This year, we'll see. Resume, transcript, and usually a cover letter are sort of the most commonly requested application documents for a law firm summer job. Writing samples absolutely can be a thing. Sometimes a personal statement addressing a prompt that the firm has put up. Sometimes a list of references. And unlike what you would do for a judge, for example, where you need sort of a letter from somebody, firms usually are requesting a list. It's sort of name and contact information, and they will call. But for the most part, you can send in an initial application with resume, cover letter, transcript, and that will sort of get the ball rolling. And increasingly, our office has leaned into the direct application model because firms are opening their job portals at different times, anytime between, it seems, November and January, February of 1L spring. Rather than sort of try to collect them and corral the process on our own, we say, keep an eye out for the firms that are of greatest interest to you, however we're defining that. And when their portal opens, probably you're going to the firm's website and applying. There are a couple of other interfaces. There's our Simplicity site, which usually is just directing you to the law firm's webpage anyway. There's Flow, which also is sort of a conduit to a law firm's application. Sometimes, and we'll have some of these, our office will do a resume collection or some other sort of UVA Law organized application method that runs through us. But increasingly, the applications we're talking about now, these earlier ones, are just going directly to the firm on their website.
And so if I'm a 1L and I have met the firm at an event, I'm going to absolutely put that probably in the cover letter. And so, the reason I say that is because you're not hopefully just some anonymous law student of thousands in the country who are sending your application kind of out into the void. All of these networking events are helping you figure out where you want to apply, and also hopefully they're remembering meeting you.
Absolutely. There's at least two goals when you do networking. One is certainly learning. But I, who am very strategically minded when I'm having these conversations, would say that perhaps even the more important one is you're building your professional brand. You want a firm who has a person whose job it is, the legal recruiting team, their job is to track your interactions with the firm. And so if you go to a panel, if you attend a dinner, they have your name, they have your email, they're keeping a record of that. And so all these strong positive impressions you're leaving absolutely inure to your benefit later. And your cover letter says, I was so excited to speak with your attorneys at the Mix and Mingle in the fall, et cetera. So absolutely, your strongest application is one that does not sort of fall on a firm that's never seen your name before.
Right. And another way students drive there, we absolutely work with students who are applying to markets that aren't as present on grounds. And our students do an incredible job reaching out, especially to alums, and naming, I'd love to speak with you, setting up the times, and doing that increasingly early such that they have those relationships. And we're really lucky that our graduates pick up the phone and are really willing to do that. And I think that really bolsters, the confidence of students who are starting to engage in the conversations, and allows students to really take ownership if they're looking at a market where they might not be able to make the connections as easily, but they're able to build them up quite quickly because they have the UVA connection.
That was going to be a question that I had for later. So that's not surprising at all that, it sounds like our students and graduates don't really have a problem finding jobs, but in the event that they haven't been able to get much traction meeting people, the UVA Law alumni, like you said, are going to pick up the phone, are going to spend the time, are going to help in any way they can. At least that's been my experience.
And that's something that hasn't changed since we were
that's
for
exactly
20 years
right.
running and longer than that. Like, our folks graduate happy for the most part, and they are generous and they want to give back, and they absolutely help students succeed.
100%. Hoping to clerk for a judge in addition to landing a firm job? You do not want to miss Season 2, Episode 1 of the show, where Assistant Dean for Judicial Clerkships Ruth Payne explains why clerking can be such a valuable experience and how UVA law students are consistently landing clerkships in the most competitive markets.
It's one of the few chances you have that early in your career to get something that substantive. Like, you are helping to write the opinions that shape the course of the law. Yeah. And so from just a sort of academic perspective, the work is fantastic. Beyond that, you're working with a judge, and people don't become judges early in their career. Typically, right. That's a pinnacle job. And so you have these amazing jurists who have seen everything, done everything, often been on the bench for a long time, who are, again, in this very small environment, working with you on your writing. So the ability to just learn things very quickly, how to think about the law, how to write succinctly, that's the reason that, clerkships are valued so highly. And so this is just resume-wise, career impact-wise, everybody loves a clerk. And it's because of that, because the training is so intensive and you learn so much that you can't learn someplace else.
So this is not going to apply to maybe a ton of people, but you tell me if I'm wrong. I was having lunch with a student recently, and he was telling me about how he had just finished his 1L summer at a firm, and there was just an interesting confluence of events where he also had his 2L summer offer already in hand. And if I'm remembering the facts correctly, he had to tell the 2L summer employer a week into his 1L summer job whether he was going to come to that 2L summer job. These are two different firms and in two different cities. So now this 1L is starting his 1L summer job. He's just a great guy. He wants to obviously make a good impression and do good work. Yet now he's in the position of he has to tell the 1L summer firm that, hey, by the way, happy to be here this summer, but next summer I'm going to your competitor in a different city. I mean, and that's one example that I just in admissions heard on at a lunch. So how often is that happening? I assume it really only impacts folks who are getting those limited 1L summer firm jobs. So maybe not that many people. But what I do know is what is happening more and more is our students are being put in a position where they have to have potentially awkward conversations with employers while still either leaving the door open for a future opportunity or not. Yeah. And I just would love to hear how you counsel them on these pieces, because on the one hand, the firms are kind of doing it to themselves, right? So how much can we put it on the students to navigate that? But so how does that work?
It's a really interesting question, and another one that is temporal. So a couple years ago, that was a pretty rare thing. Mm-hmm. We'd have students, as you say, getting those sort of not particularly numerous. Again, outside of Texas, I should explain maybe that in Texas, 1L summer hiring has always been pretty robust. It is the main pipeline into permanent jobs. Elsewhere in the country, not so much. So in D.C., New York, Chicago, California, et cetera, 1L firm jobs have always been pretty scarce, at least at the big law level, because 2L summer is the main hiring model. But up till a couple years ago, we would have folks in that position. Maybe they had their 1L job, they received a 2L offer, they had to navigate those conversations. And I remember when that started to be a thing, feeling very uncomfortable. I was like, these are awkward. We got to make sure the 1L firm feels we're invested. We don't have a foot out the door, but we got to make this decision. Last year, rampant. Absolutely rampant, because the acceleration of 2L timing was such that, people were getting getting their 2L offers not as many folks as now, but it was, it was starting to be a thing that you could receive a 2L summer offer in January of your 1L year, and maybe you only had until shortly into the summer. Maybe you had less time than that to make a 2L decision. And then a lot of the 2L recruiting had coalesced around the June grades. So lots and lots of people were in this position. And I think, frankly, the sort of, en masse nature of it kind of solved the problem because the firms, they were where they were. We do, we don't take the summer off by any means. We do a lot of counseling. Maybe in this news cycle, everyone will be done in the summer, but absolutely had lots of conversations throughout the spring and summer with folks to workshop. Like, how are we talking about this? Are we approaching our current firm? Probably our current firm is approaching us. But by this summer, firms knew this was going on. And so it was different than sort of, what do you mean you've pledged yourself to another firm a different summer? This cycle, though, I think we're going to see a lot of people having made a 2L summer decision before they know what they're doing in their 1L summer. And I find that interesting from the law firm perspective because do I want to hire a 1L to my firm who's already got a 2L job with another firm? Maybe. I think the innovators will find a way to try to make that an interesting proposition, a money-making proposition from an employer perspective. But I think that's another reason we're going to see sort of the 1L model for law firms kind of collapse into the 2.
Well, and what about the fact that I could be the 2L firm, I'm hiring you before you have your 1L summer job. What's preventing me, the 1L, from sitting by the pool for the summer?
Only us.
the investment in their long-term legal trajectory and the joy of learning about the law, Natalie.
Of course.
Yeah.
But I remember for us, what you did over this 1L summer was not irrelevant to you getting your 2L summer job. And so now it's kind of seems not that important.
As recently as last year, we were still helping people talk about their 1L summer job in their resume, in their cover letter, in their interviews. This year, I don't know if we will. And I think the optimistic part of me, the part that sees this as sort of opportunity in the free market competition system in which we find ourselves, says that, yes, the pressure's off a little bit. Like, you can do something for your 1L summer that you find genuinely interesting, that you're excited about, you want to explore. We would still argue you absolutely want to do a legal job.
Sure.
It is important. We don't know how 2L is going to, whether you're going to be ultimately happy. You might want to make a pivot. We have plenty of students who think that down the road they don't want to be at a firm. Maybe they're working with us to be at a firm for the second summer and hope to earn that offer, but they want to put a foot in for a government position or be a public defender, something else. So 1L summer is important, to use for that sort of a pivot down the road. So I think we won't be at the pool. But it could be very freeing to know I've done the big one. I can do something that I'm excited about this summer.
And I think that's a perfect segue to something I just want to touch on quickly, which is the folks who do want to have maybe after a few years in big law or the private sector go transition to public service, or the folks who are also hoping to land a clerkship, whether before they start in their firm job or after a couple years, because I know now judges are doing it that way. They are, I assume, bouncing kind of between your offices for counseling, and how are you negotiating, the timing of the law firm job versus the clerkship? Because, again, talk about things used to be straightforward for us. If you got a clerkship, for the most part, it was right when you graduated, and then your firm would be super happy and give you a big fat clerkship bonus, and all was well. Now the timing has been a little bit sort of thrown up in the air. So can you just talk about a student who is considering different avenues?
Yeah, that's a situation we certainly engage in conversations with students about it. And so they're sort of working across offices. They're gathering all the information. That's the great part about them driving, is that it's their strategy, and so they get the input, and then they move forward. And we certainly are advocating, you're communicating to the firm, and here's what you're sharing. And they're sort of watching that timeline unfold. And as you said, it means that they sort of have to be prepared for at any point in the process how do things look different now? I think that the things that stay universal are like the impression that they want to make on the firm and building their relationship with the firm. And so we're sort of there to just support what's the plan, how can you communicate it, and work that way.
What role are faculty playing, if anything? I know with the clerkship process, as you flagged earlier, Lauren, they're writing letters. Like, you cannot get a clerkship without a faculty letter. But when you mentioned the list of references, is faculty on that, or that's really like other professional references?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I should absolutely say here that Ruth Payne, who heads the clerkship shop, is the expert on all these things.
Yeah.
And to the extent I opine on clerkships, I apologize. I know just enough to be dangerous. My understanding accords with yours that if you, when you're applying to judges, faculty letters, faculty endorsements are very important. On the law firm side, if a firm asks for references, typically it's a list. If the firm, we like our guidance here as everywhere, is if the firm tells you exactly who to list, you should do that. If they say they want 2 professors and 2 supervisors, that's what you should do. But as a default matter, we say 3 to 4 references, a mix of professors and people who supervised you in an employment capacity. Usually a firm does want to see at least 1 law school professor, and that feels even more tricky today when you haven't even taken a final exam. Not to be UVA love lavish here, but the great thing about our professors, and probably professors everywhere, is they want students to succeed. And so, we tell students, go talk to the favorite professor. Tell them, here's where I sat, I came to office hours, here's what I asked about, would you be willing to be a reference? And overwhelmingly, they want to help. So firms that do call references, and there certainly are plenty of those, faculty can absolutely move the needle for those folks.
One of our classmates who's been on the podcast, Mike Keenan, recently reminded me that we went out to lunch with Professor Nelson, who was our civil procedure professor. I had no memory of this, which is shocking because he was my favorite professor. And he's like, yes, you made me go to lunch with you and Professor Nelson. And we ate like burritos at Zazu's. What was the place? Yes. And it's funny to me now because probably I initiated that lunch just because I loved Professor Nelson for no other reason. Just because I loved Civ Pro for whatever reason. I thought he was super smart. I mean, he is brilliant. He's still here. But now I'm thinking like, yeah, if I needed him to be a reference for anything, would I be like, I haven't taken the exam yet, but I was the one that we had
we had burritos.
Like I just imagine, again, talk about the things that our students have to be thinking about now that we didn't.
They have to go beyond the burrito.
Go beyond the burrito.
That's the
Beyond
slogan.
the burrito.
So again, great segue to amidst all of this change, all of this madness, everything that listeners can't see, but that's making my eyes pop out of my head as we're talking here. What are the constants? I mean, you touched on this, Lauren, our alumni. That has not changed. Our willingness and availability of alumni. Same thing with faculty. Clearly, that has not changed at all. But, I want to talk about, I'm very interested in sort of intangibles and qualities that candidates are bringing to the table and strategies. Like, what's something that you would say has not changed and in your estimation is not going to change?
Yeah, that's a great question. The essence of the job has not changed, and how that relates to our conversation is the things that employers are looking for. Like those have not really changed. They want people who are hungry for the work, who really want to be lawyers of this type, people who want to be in the cities that they're saying they want to be in. The standard of excellence when you go to a big law firm. I mean, one thing that has changed, the salaries have gone up astronomically.
Well, geez, I mean,
they paid us too much. And
I know.
Man, that's just not even close to now.
Since we're talking about this, I do want to circle back actually to something we touched on earlier, which is the impact of the pandemic. So, at least at my firm, back in the day, like you weren't really working from home ever unless you were super ill or if someone was a parent and maybe they had a sick child or something, but like it was just not done. It was very FaceTime dependent and a lot of in-person meetings, a lot of in-person interaction. So firms now have various expectations of in-person versus remote. I think we've seen the pendulum swing back and forth in the last 5 years. I want to hear, what are the firm's expectations today, and how do you counsel students? Because I could see on the one hand, I think the in-person is so important to your development as a young attorney. And by the way, that's where you also get the benefits. Like, would I have stayed at my firm for 7 years if I wasn't making those friendships, going to happy hours, popping out on Fifth Avenue for a coffee, getting a partner lunch at a nice New York place? Like, if I was just in my apartment alone doing all that work, would never have stayed for 7 years. So on the one hand, I think those in-person interactions are so important for just your fulfillment, your growth, your network, all of that. But on the other hand, I could see like more and more the generation that is coming through law school has the expectation of being able to work remotely. So what are you telling them?
I think something that we talk about generally, and there's a wrinkle to it here, is the idea of sort of looking at attorneys, at folks who are thriving at the firm, and you're sort of following their lead, right? And you can do that across, different. You're kind of figuring out, how do they build relationships? How do they ask for more work? How are they presenting themselves? But this is a slightly tricky one, because for someone who perhaps has made their impressions, built relationships, and has more flexibility, the goal is certainly that you take the time to do that for yourself now. So I do think that while you're looking at sort of what other attorneys are doing and what the firm provides as the practices, I think you're absolutely right that, as Lauren said, one of the best things you can be is hungry. That's like one of the best things you can present as. It's probably harder to do that when you're not in person, when you're not in the building, and sort of like building those relationships across a desk instead of through a screen. I think a lot is irreplaceable that you could sort of cement as your brand early. It's going to be hard to do that when you're not there.
There's so many interesting threads here, and one is your prior question about what hasn't changed. I continue to counsel. I think our office continues to believe, before you ask for accommodations, before you ask for, to do something differently, you want to establish your value. You want to go and show, I'm here to work. I understand the game. I know you're not paying me $250,000 a year to not be available and to not do great work. But you're absolutely right. Post-pandemic, the world looks very different. When my husband and I made the decision to move here, our firms were going to let us be remote, but it was like nobody else had done this before. My husband did stay with his law firm. And when the pandemic hit, people were looking to him to find out, how do you do this? He's like, I've been remote for years. What are you talking about? But it was life-changing. I think the firms continue to struggle a little bit with what arrangement are we even asking for?
Right.
You hear a lot of sort of 3 days in, 2 days out, or you hear community Wednesdays. We expect everyone to be in the office on this day, to try to keep some of that mentoring and relationship building and the kind of things that, as you say, they only happen in the hallways. I used to get work by bumping into partners, and they'd say, hey, do you have time? And I'd say, please, I would love to work on that matter. So I think we counsel students, as Kira said, both show your value before you start sort of disappearing, and also do what the people that are succeeding are doing. And model your behavior after that. And I sort of, my thought is always like yours, like you get more out of being there.
You get the benefits. I cannot imagine. I mean, the work friendships and the just kind of like, maybe there's like funny stories or just things that are lost. I mean, even now, like we have a 1 day a week remote work policy, and my team, I mean, it's sad to me when we're not all in the office, but that's how it is. But it's just because you build those relationships and you want to see people, and you're like happy when you're around each other. And I know big law is a little bit different, but again, you're working that long, you're working those hard hours. I say, show your face, and it's just going to be like that much more. Again, going to longevity, I think it helps for that. So you talked about being hungry. I'm curious, is that what you would say is kind of like the number one, trait, quality, attribute when you see someone who's really successful in the job search process? Like, what are you looking for in that? And then going back to like becoming a keeper, the people who are thriving and getting the return offer and who maybe the firm would even tell you like, hey, we had so-and-so here this summer. Man, she's a star. What common threads do you see in students?
Certainly I call it hungry, but, interested is another word that works.
Yeah.
We consistently hear from firms, the top performers, the most desired candidates seem to really want to be there.
Yeah.
And it all rolls up into showing up physically,
Right.
Raising your hand for work, wanting to talk about the work, seeming engaged and excited. I think one way to not make a strong impression is to sort of act like you're kind of put upon to be doing the work, to be given assignments, to have too many hours, et cetera. And that's not to say it's not a challenging job and you can't end up overloaded, but people who raise their hands and act like they're enjoying it, they go far. I think on our side, the quality that I always think about as to sort of who succeeds in the job search process, engagement is probably the version of hunger. No matter who you are, what your resume looks like, where you've been before this, working with our office, sort of doing the things that, the guidance advises at the times we advise doing it. If you stick with it, good outcomes follow. That's sort of been our experience.
Lauren, I have heard you say multiple times, if you come to our office, we will help you. Like, you will get what you want and what you need. But we can't help you if you're not there. And I think that is like the biggest lesson, like you all will figure it out, but somebody opting out. And this, this happens pretty rarely, but there's always like, one or two a year in each class. But like, yes, I can understand as a 1L, you're like, again, going back to like you're overwhelmed, you're thinking about studies and stuff. And so it's like, I'm just going to not think about the job search. And that's just, I think, the worst thing that you can do.
Yeah, that's what makes it hard. And there can be, get later on in the process, maybe you feel like you're not succeeding. There can be shame there. There can be sort of a tendency to hide and withdraw. Don't hide and withdraw. That's, the recipe for making it through is staying engaged. I will also say, people, sometimes people try to hide. We'll try to find you. We work closely across the building with other administrators, with professors. Like if we are worried about somebody, we will reach out. We will send up the bat signal, try to draw them back in. But it's absolutely true. The tried and true, we have lots of data to show ways to maximize outcomes is to stay engaged with the process.
And just reiterating that it's an individual process. Whatever that person needs at the time, hopefully people will know more from listening to this episode. You are both very kind, warm, empathetic, like
old people,
compassionate old people who want that person to succeed. You're not going to say, well, every single other person does this and now you're behind and now no, it's going to be like, where are you at right now? What's sort of hanging you up and how can we move past it?
I think if I was thinking about two themes that I think one is like sort of something we practice on a meta level that you'll then use in your job. It would be sort of like run your own race, but take feedback. So, you're drowning out some of the things that are serving maybe other people because they have different goals than you. They're aiming for a different market and a different practice. So be able to tune that out when you need to and stay focused on your goals. And then if you do receive feedback, whether that, from us or from an employer, reflect on it. And I think the students are incredible at that. I've just been blown away by the humility and the willingness if we say, like, what if we shape the narrative this way? Or could you run this question, making these points? They are just like immediately weaving that in. And I think that's going to serve them well at firms, right? If you show up, you know what you know from law school and your experiences. But if you show that you take feedback, there's really no limit on how much you'll develop at the firm. And I think that's something they get to cultivate with our office. And it bodes really well for their practice because they universally are absolutely willing to workshop and keep trying.
I've always thought individual counseling was the sauce, but never more so than in today's market. I mean, it's chaos. And if you're not meeting someone where they personally are, you are going to get lost in the shuffle. The only other thing I was going to observe is that candidacy, it's the sum of a lot of different parts. Your grades, your work background, the strength of your documents, the strength of your interviewing. As long as you stick with us, we will help you compensate for any weakness, with a strength. And so if the grades don't come back the way you hoped, that's okay. We're going to amplify interviewing. We're going to talk more about prior work experience strengths that we bring. So sticking with us, like we can, but if you hide, we can't help.
Well, and I really love thinking about it this way. There is no limit to how much you can succeed if you are willing to have that humility and not take things personally, right? Like, we're all going to be lawyers. Like, you can't really take things personally. There are going to be a lot tougher audiences out there for them in their legal career than you two, right? Telling them, hey, let's go about it a different way. So I think that's so good to keep in mind. I'm going to keep doing my best and give you like the good raw material of students so that you're not, these are not like huge projects you're taking on, right? Like,
Keep admitting wonderful people, Natalie. That certainly helps.
I will do my best. So as we start to wind down, a couple just closing questions. All things considered, would you say it's easier to get a job with a law firm now or harder than when we were doing it?
I don't know. Like a lawyer, I might have to reject that question. I mean,
it depends. Objection.
When we were getting jobs in this, the summer of 2007, pre-crisis, pre-pandemic, with these artificial guidelines in place, you could be pretty lackadaisical about it and end up in a job. But I will say, I think we ended up in good jobs sort of in spite of the process rather than because of it. I think now the timing and the amount of preparation that goes into it is certainly more work. It's certainly harder to juggle with academics and being a new law student. But the outcomes are so much more thoughtful. And so, is it harder? I mean, maybe in terms of what you're putting into it, but what you're getting out is better.
Wow. That's, great to hear, and also just like a great life lesson. You get out what you put in, right? Like, you're going to get a better result if you put in more work. And this actually dovetails with my next question, which was going to be, maybe you don't know the answer to this, and that's fine. Are people staying at law firms longer than when we were doing it? Because I think, I was at my firm 7 years, which I think even for our graduating class was like on the longer end. I think a lot of people do the 2-3 years and either go to a smaller firm or go to the government or go do something else entirely. I'm just curious, because again, if you are being more thoughtful about the process, which they are now by default, they sort of have to be, in theory, you're ending up at a place that's a better fit. So I'm curious if we know the impact of that.
It's a good question. So we still do a thriving young alumni business.
Okay, good. I'm glad you brought that up.
Between changes in, in like things that have happened to the economy, the federal government, sort of law continues to be a very fluid profession for all kinds of reasons. So I don't know that I would say. I see the shift being sort of before us. One thing we're not too old for. Once upon a time, our parents' generation. They went to a law firm and the goal was to be a partner. And that was almost everybody's goal. These were the days before the firm could get you remotely, et cetera. You didn't even have a BlackBerry then. You had a phone. And, if you didn't take papers home, you were unreachable. I think it was a different job. So my anecdotal sense, and this is not well studied, but is that it continues to be a pretty fluid profession. And even making strong, educated choices about the first step, we still have lots of people saying, big law is my first step, but it is a means to an end. My goal is to be, at DOJ, or it's to, to come and be an illustrious career professional or something else.
So I'm glad you reminded me that you also work with alumni who are hoping to make a job or a career transition maybe from one firm to another. And I imagine that's more of a truncated process. You're not working with them for months and months and months, but you're just maybe advising, consulting.
Yeah, it can really depend on the, and so we, to the extent we have any expertise at all in an alumni transition, it's usually about the first 5 years out. After that, folks we occasionally have an alum who's been in practice for decades call and ask for help. And I'm like, gosh, you know way more about this than I will.
Yeah.
But young alums, we see a lot of folks, for example, pivoting in and out of clerkships. Maybe they're going for that. Not straight out, but sort of I was at the firm for a little bit. Now I want to clerk. Then I'm trying to get back into a firm. We see folks making transitions because, heaven forbid, the economy or jobs are lost or something else. So sort of how much we engage can really depend. Certainly there are the light touches. Somebody's a strong performer and they just want to be at this firm versus that one, or they need to move geographies. market conditions are good. They just want a little, refresher on interviewing or resumes. But then we have some folks who, maybe there's sort of more of an uphill battle. What they're trying to do is trickier for one reason or another. So certainly we do have some sustained relationships. But our promise, for better or worse, is you've got us until, that first few years out till you've got a good start. So
And it's a credit to Kevin and to Lauren and to the legacy of the office that, coming in with fresher eyes, seeing, alums reach out and seeing them working with our office, it's very clear that they very much still feel connected, that they trust that the office will be there for them, that the advice remains relevant. And that's because of what Kevin built and Lauren has so beautifully perpetuated.
Oh, aren't you sweet?
We did have Kevin on an earlier episode, I think season 1. So for listeners, that's Kevin Donovan. That was in like the fall of 2022, I think, when I had him on. So folks can go hear all from him. He still is working on a consulting basis?
Yeah, he works actually predominantly with our alums.
Okay,
he chose
great.
to sort of, he did a poor job retiring, so he's still very much helping out the law school, but he works predominantly with our alums making transitions.
What would you say is your favorite part of your job?
I think it's stories, and it's because you have to know each student's story before you can help with the career piece of it. And then you also get to see how the work you're doing together leads. If that, for some students, that's I have to get to my home market. I have to be close to family. And that is incredibly motivating to hustle on behalf of like someone and the goals that they have and where they want to practice. And I think part of students driving is that they get to share as much as they want to about their motivations. I need to get to where my partner is, or this is the work, this is my major and I'm so excited about this area of law and I'm just like on fire to go practice this way. And so knowing that for each student just gives like quite a reason to hustle on their behalf, and it's a lot to celebrate as they land in the places they've been trying to go.
Kira put it beautifully. I couldn't say it better. I was going to say I get 300 new friends every year. I get to meet, you intersect with all of these lives you do. You hear incredible stories. I mean, and Natalie, you guys admit just, I hear what these people have done at the age of 22, 23, and I think, oh my, holy cow, like what a life. So absolutely, like working with individual people to help them solve problems, trying to get them to where they want to go. It's so rewarding. And I think it's why a lot of people become lawyers. So I saw great synergies when I moved from practice to here. I have clients who need help, try to help them. It's very rewarding.
I would echo what you both said. I mean, for admissions work, it's their individual stories. It's what brought them to apply to law school and like seeing them then on their way to their goals. So it really is, it all comes back to who they are as people and like what is compelling about that. And so, it just goes back to the advice I always give people is we have to get a sense of who you are from your application in order for you to move forward. And for you all, again, you're doing this at an individual basis. Like you are doing it according to their goals, to where are they trying to go, what are they trying to accomplish. And so it really does, it all goes back to the UVA Law way, I think, of just a very personal process. Whether it's me in admissions, whether it's career services, whether it's, faculty, all of that. So for folks out there who are applying, which is most of our listenership, applying or considering applying, what advice would you give?
I think, and the accelerated timeline feeds into this, but it's not the sole reason. I would say reflect really broadly early, as in you're constantly sort of testing premises and gathering information about what sounds like you as a practicing lawyer and what doesn't. You're reflecting on geographies and like where you see yourself living and thriving, because we're certainly hearing from students that they're feeling like they have to rush on some of that. And I think trying to like build up the sense of how you see your life, that's a big charge. That's a lot and sort of existential. But if you can, I know it's easy to focus, for example, on the admissions process and like applying in these decisions. But if you can carve out some time to talk to your family and practitioners and develop that sense of where you want to aim, you have a lot of big decisions that are coming soon, even after you sort of have the grand one of getting into law school and choosing. So ideally, find ways to start chipping away at that, and hopefully then you have a sense of where you want to aim next.
Absolutely. And on the most basic level, learn what lawyers actually do and make sure you want to do one of those things before you make the tremendous investment of time and money that is law school. I don't think, and this is a credit to our admissions process, we don't see many people who don't have a good sense of what lawyers do. But in private practice in particular, litigation at a big law firm doesn't look a lot like litigation on Suits or whatever that you see on TV.
Yeah.
There's sort of some fundamental differences. And so anything people can do to find out more about what it is actually like to practice law and the ways to practice law that appeal to them before making the investment, I think is really the best thing you can do for yourself. Because this, law school's hard, it's expensive, the job is hard. This is not easy stuff. And so before you throw yourself into it, anything you can do to find out, is this actually what I think it is,
right,
is probably worthwhile.
It's a hard job. It's a very worthy career, I think, a very noble career. But it is going to be a lot of work. And for a lot of people, their identity. And so, you won't know exactly what it's like until you start doing it. But you should have a good idea of what's going to go into it. So I do think that's cannot really be overstated. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you all work with students about, or you just want to make sure people know about the job search process today?
I think the only, to the extent I get 11 seconds to make a public service announcement, try not to get too spun out about the things you hear and read online. I mean, gosh, it is so different, I think, to be a student with the internet and with social media and with Reddit and with whatever else. One of the things we didn't have, I guess, was that sort of mass dissemination of information. And it sounds really quaint, but I think it was easier not to get spun out when, most of what you knew about the process, you had to see people doing. You had to physically sort of talk to them about. There's so much online, and I know it can be extremely anxiety-inducing. And I would just encourage people to try to tune some of that out, make your choices that are right for you. And then when you get hopefully to UVA Law, ask us, and we can chart your path.
Yeah, I think also holding on to your value and your worth beyond that process.
Of course.
Throughout. That sounds obvious, but we meet every day with students who are brilliant, and we can see on paper and in person all that they bring. And it's quite easy to let the decisions of employers loom large and tell you a little bit about, sort of your future and what's a possibility for you. These are individual decisions by individual employers. You know yourself, and you need to hold on to that.
I think it's a great way to sort of wrap up one of our themes, which is more information, yes, can be good, but it can also be overwhelming. So they're preparing more, they know more about what they want to do, and that can be a lot. Whereas we were flying blind. And again, it all worked out. It's going to all work out for everyone out there. I really cannot thank you both enough for coming here. You are both scheduled within an inch of your life, counseling our students and helping them find jobs. So thank you so much for making the time to be here.
Thank you for having us. This was so fun.
This was wonderful.
This has been Admissible with me, Dean Natalie Blazer at the University of Virginia School of Law. My guests today were Assistant Dean for Private Practice Lauren Parker and Director of Private Practice Kira Walmer, both 2008 graduates of UVA Law. For more information about UVA Law, please visit law.virginia.edu. The next episode of Admissible will be out soon. In the meantime, you can follow the show on Instagram at Admissible Podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and please remember to rate the show wherever you listen to podcasts.